Hello guys and welcome back to my channel, and let's continue with the human physiology. In this lecture we will be discussing about the spinal reflexes. Then we will go to the brain. We'll discuss about the various tracts like the corticospinal tract, cerebrospinal tract, various other tracts, and we will discuss how they are important for us, and also we'll discuss about spinal reflexes like various reflexes like knee-jerk reflex, Babinski reflex, or Golgi tendon reflex, flexor extensor reflexes, or even cross extensor reflexes, which are important and very important from the neurological point of view, and we'll see how it goes about, right? So let's start with the spinal reflex. So what is a spinal reflex? It is any voluntary or involuntary reflex which is generated by our spinal cord in response to a stimulus, right? So it is a somatic reflex. It may occur without involvement of the higher brain centers, right? But can be intervened. So in case a spinal reflex is taking place, it is not necessary that the higher brain authorities have to be involved in it, but yes, the brain has a control over it. It can be terminated or it can be enhanced. Can be mono or polysynaptic. That means either it involves one synapse. For us, the example for monosynaptic reflex is the knee-jerk reflex, or it can be a polysynaptic reflex, for which the example is a Golgi tendon reflex. So let's study in detail what exactly this knee-jerk reflex is and what exactly this Golgi tendon reflex is. So in knee-jerk reflex, what we do is we target the patella, right? We target the patella. So whenever we take a mallet and strike at the patella, right? Patella or also the kneecap, which we know it generally. So whenever we take a mallet and we strike at the patella, what happens is the muscle spindle fires. So there's a stimulus over here and the muscle over here. It generates an action potential due to which the action where we have given a bombardment at the patella, right? So when the stimulus is transferred from here, it goes to the muscle fiber, right? And then this goes to the spinal cord. So what happens over here is the action potential is fired. So the sensory neuron is carrying it initially, right? The afferent neuron carries the signal to the control center. So over there what happens is the sensory integration center, after going to the afferent sensory neuron, takes it to the integration center where the data is integrated. It is compared with the threshold values and then a response is given in such a way. So once the response goes, this goes to the spinal cord. This is the horns of the spinal cord, dorsal and the ventral horns. So what happens is, now over here the information is processed. They compare it with the threshold, and then what is happening is the efferent or the motor fibers, right? Afferent is sensory, efferent is motor. So this carries from the sensory organ up to the brain or the spinal cord, and the efferent carries from the spinal cord till the effector organ, right? So what happens over here is, now the stimulus is being carried out, right? So here the E2 I have marked and E1 I have marked. So E1, what happens is, it is the efferent fiber 1, okay? It is going to the quadricep muscles, right? Going to the quadricep muscles, and what is it causing? It's causing the contraction of the quadricep muscles, right? So it swings the leg in the forward direction. So the leg is moving in the forward direction. In E2, what is happening is a interneuron is involved. So it affects on the hamstring muscles and it causes the hamstrings to stay relaxed and it allows the extension, right? That's how the leg moves. So the hamstrings are relaxed and the quadricep muscle is contracted. So the leg moves in the forward direction. This is what happens in the knee-jerk reflex. And with this, we can diagnose if the L2 to L4 segment of the patient is working properly or not. This is a important neurological diagnosis to check if the L2 to L4 segment of the spinal cord is functional or not. So what is the two things happening over here? We have given a stimulus with a mallet, with a strike at the patella. A firing takes place. It goes to the command center where the information is integrated. It is compared to the normal threshold. If there is a difference, in which a response is generated. So first what happens is the quadricep muscle is contracting. Quadricep muscle contracts, the leg is moving forward. The hamstring pulls the leg backward, but here it stays relaxed. So what is happening is aiding in the forward direction, right? So as you can see, this was initially how the leg was. You have striked it. Now this is the movement. The leg has moved forward. It has moved in the forward direction, right? And this is a reciprocal inhibition. So what is a reciprocal inhibition? So the contraction took place over here, because of which relaxation has taken place in the antagonist, right? So this was the agonist where contraction has taken place. In response to that, the antagonist relaxation is taking place. So simultaneously contraction and relaxation is taking place. That is what is called as a reciprocal inhibition. So in order to counter this contraction, relaxation is produced. If both contract, then the leg stays in the same place, right? The leg is not moving at all. So this is called as a reciprocal inhibition. I hope you guys have understood. Similarly, we have ankle jerk reflex also. We check it at the ankle, right? We check it at the ankle joint. So that is for the diagnosis of sacral 1 to 2, right? Next is the bicep reflex. Similarly, at the bicep we strike over here. So what should happen ideally? Contraction should take place. This confirms cervical 5 to 6 segments, and similarly at the triceps when we check, this confirms cervical 6 to 7. So this is what the knee jerk reflex was all about. Next, let's go to the Golgi tendon reflex. So here what is happening is we are targeting the patellar tendon, right? The patellar tendon is being, here we are targeting the patella directly, right? We're interested in the muscle, but over here what is happening is the patellar tendon is being targeted. So what happens again? This here what happens is increased sensory stimulation. So we're getting a stimulation from here. Next what happens is the sensory neuron carries it to the spinal cord, right? To the brain or to the spinal cord. So it is the spinal cord generally. So what will happen over here is the positive signals are coming out and there is a inhibiting neuron over here, right? If you can see, one is marked in negative and two are in positive. So what is happening is once the stimulus is going from here and now it is traveling back. So what happened was we had two positive signals, right? But one of them was an inhibiting neuron. This is the inhibiting neuron over here. So what happens is the stimulus won't travel from here, the stimulus gets weak, right? And one more stimulus is traveling along this red line, if you can see, which is the spinal nerve, right? And this goes to the antagonist muscle. Antagonist muscle, what will happen is contraction will take place over here and over here relaxation is taking place simultaneously. This can also be an example of reciprocal inhibition. But here remember the most important point is the patellar tendon is being involved over here. So the response is at the patellar tendon, right? Next what happens is one is an inhibitory neuron, one is an excitatory neuron. So what happens is this goes to the integration center and asks for a motor command in response. And what happens same over here, contraction will take place over here and relaxation. So the leg is moving slightly forward because of targeting of the patellar tendon. So this blue color is the tendon, red color is the muscle innervation, right? Red color is the muscle innervation. See if you could see these dotted lines in the red, the muscle is also supposed to contract, but due to the presence of an inhibitory neuron, the response was relaxation over here. But the antagonist muscle, right? If this is the agonist, the tendon is directly attached to this muscle. The response over here, no action potential firing has taken place in that extent. The firing took place, yes, but it was suppressed by an inhibitory neuron. But in the antagonist muscle, we see a response, right? So the leg, there is a movement, slight movement of the leg seen, right? And yes, the inhibitory neuron, it doesn't let the contraction of this muscle. So this is how the Golgi tendon reflex work. Again, this is also for the diagnostic purposes. Next we have is the, okay, these two are examples of monosynaptic, right? Only one synapse is involved, whereas this is a polysynaptic, which is also called as a flexor reflex. You also might know it as a very famous example of reflex arc. So whenever you're touching a hot thing, you just move your hand vigorously without knowing, involuntary response. So again, this is a candle lit over here. This person is touched it over here, he's felt pain, the pain receptors are going. This is the bicep brachii muscle. So the sensory neuron takes it to the dorsal root of the spinal cord. Over here what happens is from the ventral root a response is generated, which is the motor response, which is to pull it back, right? The hand goes back, and this is not under our control at that very moment. Yes, the skeletal muscles are in our control, but due to this spinal reflex, it is immediate, right? As soon as you touch a hot thing, you just move your hand back. So what is happening is it is an involuntary reflex for this moment. And yes, the effector muscle involved over here is definitely, yes, the bicep brachii. The bicep brachii pulls your hand backward. This is all because of the spinal reflex. So this is how a flexor reflex works, right? And this is a polysynaptic reflex. More than one synapse are involved, and both the synapses are present within the CNS, right? Within the CNS. So this is a sensory neuron in the red. The black one is a motor neuron. Sensory neuron took the stimulus from the finger, right? That there is pain sensation over here, and immediately the motor response was that you've pulled the hand back, right? We'll discuss about 2 to 3 more reflexes, then we will enter into the brain, right? We'll study about the brain in detail. Let's continue with the spinal reflex. So we have studied about knee jerk reflex, Golgi tendon reflex, flexor reflex, and now we'll study about cross extensor reflex. So this is also a polysynaptic reflex, that is multiple synapses are involved, as you can see over here. So what happens over here is when there is a stimulus present in one side of the leg, right, or any part of the body, when there is a stimulus present in one side, the resultant is seen in the opposite side also. Like suppose if there is a pain stimulus over here. So what happens? The stimulation travels from the leg via the sensory neuron, goes to the spinal cord. After where a motor response is generated, one of them is positive and one of them is negative. The one marked in red is the inhibitory neuron, and this is the stimulus coming over here. So what happens is the leg has moved. Over here what will happen in response? This will go to the extensor muscle, we will get a positive response over here also, and the extension of the opposite leg is also taking place in response to this one. In response to the pain sensation, there is movement in the opposite leg also. This is how a cross extensor reflex works. This is a schematic representation. Next, let's study about superficial reflexes. We have two, Plantar and Babinski. So Babinski is seen in pediatrics, right? When we check for the kids, it is present up to a certain month in kids, and then it changes to plantar reflex. So what is a plantar reflex? So what we do is we take the stimulus and we stroke the sole. So what happens is in response is downward flexion of the toe. The toe moves downward, but in Babinski it is a bit different. So if this response is absent in adults, if plantar reflex is absent, then the corticospinal tract, there is a problem with the corticospinal tract. Whereas in Babinski reflex, what happens is the stimulation is same. We stroke the ankle, the sole, sorry. So what happens is dorsiflexion of hallux and fanning of the toe. So the toe becomes like a fan shape, right? So fanning of the toe. So this is present only in infants. What is the reason? Because due to presence of incomplete myelinated neurons. In adults, if this Babinski reflex is present, so it indicates a corticospinal or a motor cortex damage. So this is only for pediatric patients and this is only for adults, right? Plantar and Babinski reflex. This is superficial reflex. One more is the abdominal reflex. So what happens over here is when we stroke over the rectus abdominis muscle or over the linea alba, which is present in the rectus abdominis muscles. So what happens is it causes the contraction of the abs or the rectus abdominis muscles. It causes contraction. If somebody tickles you, what happens is your stomach contracts, right? Not the stomach, but the rectus abdominis muscle. Yes. And movement of the umbilicus in response to stroking of the skin. So as I told you, if you tickle around that place or if you stroke, the umbilicus moves and the contraction of the rectus abdominis muscle takes place, right? Rectus abdominis, transverse abdominis, the deep muscles of the abdomen are involved over here, but not very deep, just the superficial and the deep layers, right? That is the transverse abdominis and the rectus abdominis. Mostly it is the rectus abdominis. Absence can be physiological also. Yes, if you have seen fat deposition over the stomach, then yes, definitely this can be absent, and this is physiological, this is not pathological. The only cause is obesity over here. So for the upper segment it is thoracic 7 to thoracic 9. We check for the spinal nerves of thoracic 7 to thoracic 9. In the middle segment it is, that is near the umbilicus, right? So if we divide the abdomen, epigastric, hypogastric, umbilical, left and right hypochondrial, left and right lumbar, left and right iliac, right? So that's how we have divided this also. But over here we check for the thoracic 7 to 9, we check for thoracic 9 to 10, and in the lower place we check for thoracic 11 to 12. That's where it ends. So this was the abdominal reflex. Now we will check about spinal damage. What happens if there is damage to the spinal cord in C4 segment? If the C4 segment is taking place, there is tetraplegia, right? Tetraplegia is basically paralysis of the complete body, and what happens is from the neck up to the complete body, that is tetraplegia. In C6 segment it happens, then it is just below the clavicle. If this is the clavicle, right, it is just below the clavicle. The paralysis is taking place somewhere over here. Next is if it is damage to the T6. So what happens? Paraplegia. But over here what happens is it is below the pectoralis. This is the pectoralis muscle, the chest also which you call it. So it is below the pectoralis muscles, right? This is paraplegia, damage due to thoracic 6 segment. And in L1, if it damages the lumbar 1 segment, then what happens is there is again paraplegia, but below the iliacus. So if we check for the anterior superior iliac spine, we draw the line, we get the inguinal ligament, right? Inguinal ligament, just below that. From the below of the inguinal ligament, we see paralysis over there. And the next, let's study about Brown-Séquard syndrome. So we also call it as BSS. So what happens over here is injury to one half of the spinal cord, right? One half of the spinal cord feature is found below the level of lesion. So if this is the spinal cord and there is injury over here somewhere, so the response is seen over here, but only in one half, either left or right, on the ipsilateral side. So what can happen is paralysis or loss of proprioception on the ipsilateral. What is ipsilateral? On the same side. Or we can also have problems with loss of pain and temperature sensation in the contralateral side, that is the opposite side. Ipsilateral is on the same side, contralateral is on the opposite side. And what can be the reasons of BSS? That is the tumors of the spinal cord trauma, maybe an injury to the spinal cord, or ischemic injury of the spinal cord, or some inflammatory responses. With this, we have completed our spinal reflexes. Now we will move towards the central nervous system. We'll revise the midbrain, and then we'll study about the various tracts present in the brain, right?